Welcome back to the laboratory. And today we're taking a break from carbon and titanium and handcrafted masterpieces and taking it back to basics with today's theme, which is the beater, aka the Frankenbike, aka the rolling parts bin. Now, everybody should have a beater. It's a great fun way to get around on a bike that you don't really care about that much. As I've said before, even my beaters are cherished and loved, so perhaps I'm being a little bit silly saying I don't love it, because actually I do. But as I said in my previous video, it's not worth much. This has been a fun project. And it started with a phenomenon that every gentleman collector will be familiar with, which is the idea that if you look closely enough at the nooks and crannies of every workshop, there should be enough parts lying around that you can put them together and build something rideable. And certainly in my case, I've got enough bits kicking around in my workshop that every now and again I decide to cobble them together and actually make them usable. And this was my most recent decision, which was to get a 20 quid frame from a mate, this Bianchi DOS, I think it's called, strange name, but it's an aluminium frame, nothing wrong with it. It's not particularly light, not particularly exotic, but it's proven to be a useful workhorse. So as always, let's have a quick chat through the backstory of this particular build, and then let's look at what's next in the project. So, as I've said before, there's nothing particularly valuable on this, but then when I actually look at it, there's some stuff on it that perhaps might once have been considered relatively exotic. I mean, certainly the first generation 9-speed XT group set, okay, it wasn't XTR, but when XT went 9-speed in the late 90s, a lot of that has stuck around in my workshop, and this rear mech still works beautifully. Sadly, the shifter that went with it is now dead. I'll talk about that in a minute. Also, these wheels, they're not the lightest, but DT Swiss hubs are fantastic, and Wilderness Trail Bikes rims. Like I said, these are pretty burly compared to the sort of cross-country racing wheels that I'm used to. But, you know, sealed cartridge hubs, you certainly can't complain, and DT Swiss will last a lifetime. What else? This Kona Project 2 fork you may have seen before. You can also see in this light the coating of pink dust that's on it. That will be familiar to anybody that saw my previous video. That's a whole nother story. Anyway, yeah, the Project 2 fork, this is actually a relatively modern one. You can tell by the space in here, it's for a more modern suspension corrected frame geometry, rather than the original Project 2, which you'll see on this 90s explosive. The tyres are just dog's breakfast tyres. I've got a mountain of 26-inch tyres kicking around. There's a Kenda on the front and a Panaracer on the rear. These are just the two that I dug up. I'm going to convert these wheels to tubeless. They're currently running in the tubes. What else have we got? I talked before about the 105 chain set, which, I mean, chain sets aren't cheap, but this one's perfectly functional. And actually the 39 tooth chain ring is the original that was on a road bike that's now 10 years old. And likewise the saddle. It's a nice light, specialised road saddle, but perfectly comfy enough, albeit a little bit collapsed in the middle from overuse. I've obviously put a new chain on it. These pedals are probably the oldest item on the bike. Sakai bear traps, or low fats they're called, from probably the early to mid 90s. These were intended for the S-Works project that you'll have seen on other videos, but are just too scruffy. They don't do that bike justice, so they've gone on to this. Other notable things, this stem actually, this came originally on a 99 S-Works, which I've still got. So that's not a bad stem. That's going to be a nice light aluminium. The headset is a standard 1 1/8 inch, although this kind of internal headset, you can tell this is a relatively modern frame. This is a 2003 frame, because this style of headset, sort of the oversized head tube with the moving bits down inside, integrated headset I should say, is relatively modern. What else have we got? The Avid Elixir R brakes. These predate what is now SRAM. I think Avid was owned by SRAM at the time, or even if not, certainly this is the technology that evolved into SRAM brakes. These were not popular amongst the club that I ride with. They're a bit of a pig to set up. I must admit, they're not bad. I don't mind them. They're probably getting on for 20 years old and they work fine. Their pistons are slightly sticky, but they'll loosen up with use. So it was quite fun getting those set up again. Obviously, I've not bothered shortening the hoses because this is not going to be a performance build. One thing that dates the bike that I don't like is this early 2000s handlebar graphic. I don't know why it was assumed that all mountain bikers were Limp Bizkit fans in the early 2000s. This kind of flame graphic belongs on a baseball cap. It does not belong in my collection, because I might sand it off at some point. Apart from that, like I said, the bike is fully usable. In fact, it's actually quite fashionable, considering it's well, there's probably not much on it that's later than 2003, except the fork, of course. What I would say that makes it quite contemporary, the single ring gear setup is very much in fashion at the moment. Sort of 1x9, 1x10, 1x11 is nice and simple, and generally all you need for most trails. And the idea as well of a sort of a high up front end but without suspension makes a sort of nice chuckable rigid bike that brands are building today, although of course today's bikes have got 650B or 29er wheels. So apart from wheel size, there's nothing particularly out of date about this bike. It wouldn't be my first choice. I've got plenty of other more modern mountain bikes for actual sort of trail use. But if I have mates come round to stay, or ever go for a weekend with somebody that for whatever reason doesn't have a bike, this is a brilliant spare to have, that anybody, obviously that they don't have to have SPD shoes, can just jump on and ride. Now, what does it need today? The WTB wheel set that I found has got this original XT 9-speed cassette on it from, I mean, this must be a 20-year-old cassette. And there was a time, believe it or not, when I actually did quite a lot of riding. And in the mud of the northwest of England, these teeth get ground away. The mud is particularly abrasive in places like the Peak District. These teeth, although you can't really see it here, have been sharpened to the extent that when you put a new chain on, it just doesn't engage with the teeth. As soon as you put any pressure down, especially on the first half of the cassette, the chain just jumps all over the place. It doesn't engage. So this cassette, sadly, has got to be relegated to a drinks coaster, and I need to replace it. The other thing is this LX shifter. It works fine, but it doesn't have the, where is it now? It doesn't have the indicator window. Now, I've stuck a bit of plastic over where the indicator window should be, but it just annoys me. I feel like the weather can get in there and it just feels incomplete. So I'm going to replace that as well. And another question that I'm toying with is, do I replace this rigid fork with a suspension one, given that I have got more than a few suspension forks just lying around? In fact, there's a RockShox Sid World Cup, which I just happen to have, although it is destroyed. Maybe one day that's a project. All right, let's talk about some of the parts options then to finish this build. First things first, the shifter. The LX that's on that is the only 9-speed shifter that I have in this entire workshop that works. Obviously, all the other bikes are either older, which means they've got 6, 7 or 8 speed, or they're newer, which means they're 10 or 11. So I do have this XT one, which is the original one that I had in 1999. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because this shifter, as you can see, is bent down from where I had a crash and it went into my sternum. Extremely painful. And also, I mean, you can tell it did some damage because I physically cannot bend this back. So it must have taken quite a whack. So unfortunately this isn't usable. However, the LX one with this missing indicator window, I can unscrew this and put it on. So it's going to be an XT LX hybrid. Now in 99, when I bought this, I was working in a bike shop and I wouldn't have been seen dead with LX. I would have considered LX to be beneath me. However, of course, when you're building a beta, beggars can't be choosers. The fact is there's very little difference. So I'm going to take off the indicator window and just keep the broken shifter for posterity. So that's decision made. The next decision was, did I keep it 1x9 or did I update it to a 1x10 or even a 1x11? On the basis that I happen to have this beautiful 11-speed XT unused derailleur in my derailleur museum. But then I thought, no, this is too good for a beta. This is a beautiful piece of kit. It's also, in order to build the rest of the bike to be compatible with this, I'd have to spend hundreds on the appropriate shifter and cassette. So this stays for another build. And what I've decided to do is find a 9-speed cassette to replace that destroyed XT one, but with the appropriate range to give us enough range so as not to need a new chainring up front. Now, Shimano don't make that because obviously all of their mega range 1x group sets are either 1x10 or 1x11. They're probably 1x12 or 13 nowadays. I lose count. I know SRAM's Eagle is a 13-speed, I think. The only 9-speed option you can get, which goes up to a 40-tooth dinner plate at the top, is this. I think it's called Bolani. It says Bolani on the lock ring. This is the cheapest Chinese-made bit of tat that I've ever actually paid money for, but you know, 20 quid on Amazon to make this bike into a usable ride. I was prepared to swallow my pride. Let's see if this heavy piece of, I mean, it must be pretty cheap grade steel, but let's see if it works. Certainly once it's on the bike, nobody except you and I is going to know just how cheap and nasty this is. And then the only remaining question was, what do we do about the fork? The Project 2 that's on the thing is fine. Like I said, this fashion for sort of chuckable, fully rigid mountain bikes with nice fat tyres and a single ring transmission, you can pretty much do anything on the bike as it is. However, as I said, I got these forks lying around. Those of you with an eagle eye will remember this monstrosity that was what my beautiful 94 S-Works Prestige arrived with. Some comedian slash sadist had put this on to torment me. Obviously, I immediately took it off. However, it's a real mystery, this fork. It's got a bonded 1-inch threadless steerer. So you can't replace the steerer because it's not, unlike the Pace forks, it's not bolted in, it's bonded in place. You could only use this with a compatible bike, i.e. with the appropriate headset for a 1-inch steerer. Of course, this bike dating back to 2003 has a 1 1/8 inch headset in it. You could run a reducer to put this steerer in, and I think the steerer is long enough, so that's a possibility. I could actually get this fork on that bike, but it would mean binning a beautiful headset and buying a new headset with a reducer just so I can put this rather heavy and knackered fork on it. I don't know if it's worth it. That said, I don't want this gathering dust. It's actually a very good fork and will do really well on some sort of build. So yeah, I'd be very, very interested in your comments and suggestions on what to do with it. For now, if we just focus on the shifter and the cassette, we're going to get this bike fully usable and make it into something quite fun. Bye bye XT, hello Bolani. There we go. Everything indexes beautifully. The derailleur works perfectly. The only final touch that's required to make it fully work is these rear mechs, of course, were only built to take a maximum of, I'd say, 34 teeth on a cassette. This black dinner plate here is a 40 tooth, which means that the derailleur doesn't sit low enough to shift up onto the top sprocket. However, a lot of clever manufacturers have solved this problem with a very simple £7 device called an extender, which basically moves this pivot down by about an inch. That's been ordered on Amazon, it arrives tomorrow, and then this thing is going to be a fully functioning 1x9 drivetrain. Bosh! So here it is, the end of a very quick and simple project. Of course, I could keep going with this bike and put all sorts of stuff on it. I mean, the obvious thing for a 1x transmission would be to upgrade to a clutch derailleur or maybe a narrow wide chainring to stop the thing slapping and bouncing. But then, of course, where do you stop? Chris King bottom bracket, you know, titanium rail saddle. You could get silly and turn this thing into just another bling restoration, which of course it's not intended to be. So as it is, I think I love it. I'm going to have a lot of fun with this bike, and anybody, any of you that ever comes to stay with me or spend the weekend with me, if you don't have a bike, you're welcome to sling your leg over this and give it the beating that it was built to handle. And on the subject of beaters, I love hearing about other riders' beaters. What bikes do you use? What is your beater of choice or beater by default? Please do share in the comments as always, and stay tuned for more Exotica next time.